Steam and Sorcery, a transdimensional adventure starring Phineas Frakture and Sir Vlishginath the Cleansing Light. Episode 7, written by Joseph Gatch and Daniel Mitchell. Read by Fentriss O. Moore. As Vlishginath did his best to assist Phineas in awkwardly climbing back up onto his indifferent-looking horse, Mystere floated over next to them, hovering 4 feet off the ground and positioned as if he were lying on his left side with his head resting in his hand. "What are you doing?" Mystere asked, watching on with confusion as Phineas finally got his leg up over the horse's saddle. "Mounting up," Vlishginath replied in an apprehensive tone as he took Aramis's reins. Rolling over in midair as if he'd fallen onto his back, Mystere held his stomach as he giggled wildly. "You mean to tell me the professor rode a horse all the way here?" "I didn't say he did it well," Vlishginath said with a shrug. Phineas let out an indignant huff. Mystere shook his head, releasing an exaggerated sigh before stepping down onto solid ground, walking over and standing between the two of them. Clapping and rubbing his hands together for a moment, the mad sorcerer drew in a deep breath, holding it in for a moment before exhaling slowly. "I hope you're all wearing something warm." His eyes going wide as he realized what Mystere was doing, Vlishginath held out his hand as if to stop him. "Mystere, I don't think you should. The professor, he isn't going to believe it anyways. Sorcery isn't real, remember?" Mystere said, flashing an amused grin up at Phineas, who let out a single emphatic chuckle. "It's all right, Lancelot. Let him get it out of his system. I'd rather he do this hocus-pocus now than have to deal with it for the entirety of—" But even as Phineas spoke, Mystere held his hands out at his sides, palms upward with his fingers towards the sky, manifesting the innate arcane energy that dwelt within him. In an instant, an encircled rune of bright blue arcane fire formed on the ground beneath them, and suddenly they were no longer standing in the dusty field they once were. The warm breeze of the western kingdoms had been replaced with the howling, biting cold of a northern blizzard, and the professor found himself finishing his sentence in front of the gates of Darlasheld. "Our trip." Realizing the dark contrast in surroundings, Phineas looked left, then right, trying to discern exactly what had just happened. "Oh, crap," Phineas muttered. "This is getting annoying." His sinister-looking grin winding, Mystere lazily lifted off the ground, falling back as if into a comfortable chair in a levitated state, folding his hands behind his head. "Welcome to Darlasheld, Professor." "Why did you bring us here?" Vlishginath asked, opening up one of his saddlebags to remove a woolen blanket and tossing it to Phineas. "You wanted to see Roderick, did you not? Well, here you are. Better hurry up and find him before he leaves." As he spoke, Mystere gestured with open hands toward the gates. "Wonderful," Vlishginath groaned while Phineas turned to watch in fascination as the massive cogs that operated the gates of Darlasheld began to turn. Giggling amusedly, Mystere slowly began to hover up and away from them, waving as he did. "Have fun, you two, and don't eat anything you find on the floor. Bring back something nice for me. Don't worry, I'll water your plants." Then, with a maniacal cackle, Mystere spun around thrice, and in a sudden explosion of arcane energy, the mad sorcerer was gone, vibrant orange letters reading, "Miss me yet?" appearing in the air. "What a strange person," Phineas said flatly, to which Vlishginath nodded. "He really is." Passing through the gates as the technological wonder of the world spread out before him, Phineas felt at home for the first time since he'd arrived. Shaped like a pair of lines intersecting at a 90-degree angle, the walls of Darlasheld housed the most scientifically advanced city in the known world, a trait reflected in the city's design. Laid out in a grid pattern, the roads were constantly slick with melted snow, an intricate network of large pipes running boiling hot water beneath them to keep them cleared for the mechanical carriages that coursed through the city. At first glance, they could easily be mistaken as steam-powered, but upon closer inspection, one would discover that each one ran on an arcane power core, a vibrant, glowing gemstone sphere infused with self-sustaining arcane energy and contained within a metal construct that served both as a housing unit and as a means of conducting the energy from the core to the device it was powering. Gnomes and dwarves flooded the streets, outnumbering the race of men by a staggering margin, yet not bothering to give Vlishginath nor the professor so much as a sidelong glance. Near the back of the city, the large spires of the university could be seen, where intense study of both the arcane and the sciences were performed. Engineering workshops and blacksmith forges were aplenty, Darlashell boasting the title of the only city capable of working black steel, a metal so strong that its unique properties continue to baffle top researchers around the world. Every so often, a muffled explosion could be heard, sometimes in the distance and sometimes nearby, prompting Vlishginath to warn Phineas beforehand of the dangers of gnomish engineering even as they passed through the gates. "So, where are we?" Phineas asked of Vlishginath as the gates closed behind them. "Northern continent, in the city of Darlashell," Vlishginath muttered as he looked around intently for the thief. "That tells me a lot," muttered Phineas. "So, if he traveled so far in such a short period of time, he used sorcery?" Vlishginath grinned. "Is someone coming around to reality?" "Not at all. In the absence of a definitive answer, it is logical for one to assume the simplest option, the most simplest being, well, sorcery. No offense." "None taken," Vlishginath replied as his grin faded into a frown, knowing in some way that that was an insult. "I think we should try to track down a guild thief and press them for information. If my memory serves me correctly, our best bet in finding one would probably be in the northeastern section of—" "Professor?" Vlishginath looked around puzzled. Phineas had been walking right next to him no more than a second ago, and now he was just gone. After scanning the crowd for several minutes, Vlishginath finally spotted the professor with his head buried in the back of one of several steam-powered carriages parked along the boulevard. Two gnomes were talking animatedly behind him. "Professor," Vlishginath asked as he approached, "what are you doing?"
"Stranger man thinks he can fix carriage. No. Only gnomes. Only gnomes can fix. Yes.
One of the gnomes chattered. Phineas pulled out his tool pouch, selected a resonating hammer wrench, and dove back into the engine. There was a whine and a pop, followed by a release of steam that blasted the two gnomes backwards, and the engine started up with a roar. Phineas put his tools away and pulled down the hood, wiping his hands on his pants. "You're all set, Shorty. Keep an eye on that compression coupling. Some genius over-tightened it. You'll have more power to your drive shaft, so go easy on the accelerator." The gnomes got into their vehicle, leaving the professor with a glare mixed with the embarrassment of being shown up by a human and admiration that he'd figured out their problem so quickly. The carriage was put into gear and raced off at a breakneck speed, smashing into a vendor's cart filled with game fowl and causing an eruption of gnomish bickering as an argument broke out. "I told him to go easy, didn't I?" "Stupid gnomes," Phineas said as he walked past, causing the gnomes to wave their fists in the air while swearing at each other in their native language. "I thought you said you weren't from around here. How did you know what to fix on that carriage?" Vlishginath asked, steering them quickly away from the area as he spotted one of the gnomes pointing in their direction. "Engines are engines," Phineas said plainly. "I've always had a knack for figuring out anything with moving parts, whether it be a simple clock or a motorized vehicle. The principles are all the same." "You do realize those carriages run on arcane power cores, do you not?" Phineas stopped and looked at the church knight. "Magic is only magic until you figure out the trick." He began walking again. "I mean, haven't you ever questioned your surroundings? You seem to be an intelligent man. You can read and write, I assume. Look around you. There are marvels everywhere in the world if you look deep enough. Instead of seeing just garbage, have you ever really thought about why food rots? Why things drop instead of float up? Does the world revolve around the sun, or does the sun revolve around the world? Or do you just take for granted that it will rise every morning? You do realize that one day that big ball of gas will no longer be there. It will expend its energy and go out like a candle, causing all life on this world to die off. Look at things. Ask why things happen. Find out how things work. Ask, what if? And how much further must you look to find the answers that you seek? Vlishginath asked. Where will it lead you? I don't know, Phineas answered, kicking a stone. I may never find what I'm looking for. Contemplating the professor's words, Vlishginath's eyes went wide as he spotted something off to the side of the street. I've got one for you, Frakture, since you're so intent on knowing how everything works, Vlishginath said, picking up a sword from a blacksmith's workbench. Black steel, the strongest metal known in the realm, and only the smiths in Darlashell can forge it. Its properties elude even the most skilled metalsmiths in Ascension and beyond. If you could figure it out, you would be a national hero. Phineas took the blade and examined it. Beautiful craftsmanship, he said, to which the dwarf at the forge beamed proudly at the compliment. May I see that one, though? He asked, moving to the dwarf and indicating the steel that he was working on. Reaching into his pocket belt, Phineas retrieved a pair of glasses with several magnifying attachments. As the dwarf held up the white-hot steel, Phineas adjusted the lenses until he was satisfied. He looked from the steel to the dwarf and back again. Smiling, he looked back at the dwarf. You little devils! If they ever find out what you're doing! The dwarf stared at him apprehensively, and Phineas then whispered something in his ear. Am I right? He asked, to which the dwarf nodded with a look of fear on his face. Don't worry. Your secret's safe with me. You're not going to tell me, are you? Vlishginath asked, his eyebrows narrowing suspiciously as he eyed the blacksmith and the professor in turn. Do you want your economic system to be thrown into chaos, crumbling the very fabric of barter and trade as you know it, leading to war, famine, and poverty? Not particularly, but then no, I'm not going to tell you, Phineas said. But this is what I'm talking about. I learned metallurgy when I was young. I studied how to forge and cast metals, how to create the things that I need and not to rely on others, though it is a lot easier and quicker to have someone else do it. I could tell you the properties of that blade just by the densities of the metals combined to create that steel, but it would really mean nothing to you unless you knew how to work the metal into what you want it to become. Knowledge is power. All it takes is curiosity. Or thievery, which is why we are here, need I remind you. We need to make our way up past the Frostburn Inn. Cornering a guild thief will likely be our best bet. They're the eyes and ears of the city. I don't think so, cut in Phineas. What do you mean? Do you want your device back or not? Of course, but I think we're going about this all wrong. He's a thief, right? He has something that he knows nothing about, and he probably wants the best price for it. Why come here where you have all these artisans and craftsmen? He wants to find out what it is and how much it could be worth before selling it. So, what's the foremost expert on all things unusual and mechanical? Furrowing his brow in concentration, Vlishginath stared at the ground for several seconds before suddenly it occurred to him. That would be Bizpin. He'd be the one to give the best advice on something like that, Vlishginath said, checking his bearings. I believe he has his own workshop set up a few streets over from here. Then, turning to look at Phineas, he gave an approving nod. Nicely done, Frakture. Perhaps there is some merit to your way of thinking after all. What should have been a short walk took longer than the church knight expected, however. Every few shops brought something shiny and interesting for his traveling companion to get distracted by, and several times he had to drag the professor by the collar out of a store as he darted off to examine a gadget or something that caught his eye. It was as Bizpin's workshop finally came into view that Vlishginath suddenly stopped and pointed. Dressed in resplendent white fineries that looked custom-tailored and lined with the warmest furs was Roderick, walking at a leisurely gait and looking to be quite satisfied with himself. Immediately recognizing Vlishginath and Phineas, Roderick flashed his most charming smile and tipped his top hat to the both of them. If it isn't the champion of Mythos and his newly acquired sidekick. Fancy running into you here. What brings you all the way to Darlasheld? You have something of mine, Phineas said, folding his arms and tapping his foot impatiently. Holding his right hand to his chest and looking deeply offended, the sincerity of Roderick's tone seemed even more genuine than the affronted demeanor he put on. Me? What could I possibly have of yours? We should speak, Roderick. This is important, Vlishginath said, and when Roderick met the church knight's meaningful gaze, he knew it to be true.